First, we'll take a look at this morning's top stories with our first look at headlines from Sydney Edwards.
Getting into these headlines for the day, I'm Sydney Edwards. Now, federal regulators are trying to balance consumer needs for third-party vehicle repairs against the threat of cybersecurity attack that can come from using third parties for repair and maintenance. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration released a pre-final draft of its cybersecurity best practices for modern vehicle safety this week. And that guide says that auto industry should consider the ability and ease to service vehicle components through individuals and third parties, and that ease includes with cybersecurity protections. UPS and FedEx are the largest rivals for package delivery in the United States, and normally UPS would not hesitate to grab business from FedEx during times of turmoil. However, competition between the two entities has been muted as FedEx deals with the fallout from issues with FedEx ground contractor network. Those issues include the possibility for over 1/3 of its contractors to go out of business by the end of this year thanks to financial troubles. Now, some analysts are saying that UPS could see a volume opportunity from the fallout, but those thoughts are unconfirmed by UPS management. And with 1 week remaining in contract negotiation time for railroads and rail unions, rail stakeholders are worrying about the economic impact a full strike would have on the industry. The Association of American Railroads estimates that a full strike would cost $2 billion in lost economic opportunity per day, and it got that number from a 1992 federal study. ARA also said that a short-term switch to trucks or barges would be both costly and disruptive, with need for an additional 467,000 trucks per day to make up for lost capacity. So far, 5 of the 12 unions have reached tentative agreements. Now you can find these details and so much more happening at freightwaves.com and on our FreightWaves app. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, give us a like and subscribe to stay updated. You can get the full FreightWaves TV experience by heading on over to tv.freightwaves.com. I'll hand this back on over to Tony and Anthony for more.
Thank you, Sydney, so much for those headlines. And of course, we'll check in with you again throughout the show. Right now, we're going to head to our top story, which takes us to Rachel Premack, talking about what's going on with inventories and with the retail sector. Rachel, it seems like, as you mentioned in your article, this is going to be a very weird Christmas for Amazon, Walmart, and Target. Can you jump into this? And of course, good morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So what's going on is that we still are seeing big box retailers really work through this backlog of inventory that has accumulated this year through 2020 and 2021. Consumer habits were very unusual. They were buying tons, and retailers really couldn't keep up with keeping their inventories fully stocked. This year, that's really slowed down, but retailers were still getting that inventory in, still had plenty of orders on the pike. And now we're seeing some of our biggest retailers right now report in their second quarter earnings that they're still reporting very high levels of inventory, but sales have not really kept up. So, forecasting for this holiday season, retailers are analysts say that retailers are pretty uncertain when consumers will be buying and, what kind of typical purchasing habits really that will happen this time around.
I think you make great points. I mean, when you think about what the consumer is going to be buying, it is difficult to forecast. I mean, how bad are some of these retailers out of position? I mean, I know in your newsletter modes, I mean, you look at some of the charts that you included with the Walmart's, Target's inventory levels. I mean, they're pretty astounding how high they are.
Yeah. So, a lot of these retailers are still pretty heavy when it comes to kitchen appliances, electronics, and these aren't really the typical, things that you would buy for your Christmas shopping, unless, maybe I guess you could buy a food processor for Christmas, but seems a little unusual. So typically for the holiday season, you'd want to have plenty of toys. That's definitely a big one. Maybe some winter apparel, some fleeces, things like this. And these are sort of the things that retailers are stocking up on and really need to stock up on. But the positioning of their inventory right now is a little complicated. And I should say that this is definitely wildly different for each kind of retailer. So the big box retailers definitely have way too much inventory. They're really trying to work through this, but smaller fully caught up from 2020 and 2021. So it's really it's definitely a case by case basis, even within the general swath of big box retailers.
And Rachel, as you said, it's a case by case basis, but do you see any overarching way that a lot of these retailers are going to start to deal with this inventory glut that they have on their hands? I know we just had Labor Day and I saw, kind of marketing ads around the way around Labor Day sales, things like that. Do you see this kind of going on into like extended sales or anything like that, or fire sales going on to get rid of some of this inventory? Or do you think this is just going to be more maybe strategic placement and moving it a little bit further away to a different location, or just repositioning somewhere in a different warehouse?
Yeah, the big ways to deal with this current inventory glut, as you mentioned, huge markdowns. I believe Forbes is the publication. I called it Markdown Mania a few months ago. There's a lot of, and I'm sure as many of us noticed and maybe even partook in, there have been pretty unusually high Labor Day sales, at least from my inbox. I've definitely noticed that. But we're also seeing retailers cancel inbound orders, or even just taking low-selling goods back to storage. There's one retailer I read about in, I believe, Retail Dive that they have plenty of fleece, plenty of winter goods, but they're not going to keep that on the shelves in September. They're going to bring that back when it's actually cold out, which I feel like all retailers should be doing anyways. But so sort of when you start seeing winter goods available in September, it sounds like a lot of retailers are going to actually just only sell those when the weather gets cold, because they really are not trying to overwhelm consumers in this way, and they're really just trying to boost sales when they can. And then, of course, we've heard quite a bit about some retailers even leaving inbound orders in rail yards, in Chicago specifically is a big one. So there are some ways and most of these ways that they are really going to take to reduce inventory is definitely going to be expensive in the long run, or in the short run rather. And yeah, we're just going to have to see how those play out.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, great points when you think about these inventory levels. But I mean, what does this ultimately mean for like this peak retail season? I mean, you've seen the consumer they've obviously changed their spending habits, right? Focused more on those necessities that inflation's basically making that much more expensive. And now it seems like what the retailers did was just buy a lot of these, what would be called discretionary items. I mean, what is the outlook, for that retail peak season with, I guess, more discretionary items versus maybe those necessities?
Right. So, it's still a bit unclear what we can really forecast for this retail peak season. It's kind of we're trying to still see how consumers are really going to act. And as you mentioned, a lot of these things that retailers really stocked up on are things that you really don't need to buy more than once every few years. So exercise bikes, televisions, once you have enough televisions or exercise bikes for your family, you don't really need to continue to buy them, as opposed to, say, socks or food or things that are more consumable, less of those durable goods. So that's definitely one kind of issue going into the retail season. But one highlight, one kind of bright spot of all of this is that retailers like Walmart and Target, they actually reported in their earnings that that they are well positioned and that they have seen growth in purchases of toys and entertainment products, which are the big things that you would buy for the holidays, things like apparel and appliances and electronics, those sales are definitely decreasing, especially at the full price level. But they are seeing increased and renewed interest in these sorts of things that people do buy during the holidays.
Rachel, you make a lot of great points there. And it would be kind of hilarious if a lot of retailers started pushing a campaign that all new houses came with a washer and dryer in each bedroom. But when we're looking at what's going on with the situation, you mentioned, of course, some potential markdowns and aggressive sales, things like that. How does this position some companies, especially these big box retailers, with margins? I mean, I'm sure a lot of those guys can take those hits, but does this start to kind of impact maybe mid-sized retailers potentially that are having to take some hits, or is this even going to potentially impact those larger retailers as well as we see more discounts going on? Does this mean maybe layoffs happening? Does this mean lower margins potentially? Is there any kind of insight into that?
Lower margins for sure. Retailers are really just trying to dump as much as they can, whether that means, crazy markdowns or just keeping things in warehouses for maybe longer than they'd prefer. And all of those are certainly expensive measures. Target especially was one retailer that emphasized in their earnings call for the second quarter that they're really trying to be proactive. They're really trying to address this when they can, but not all retailers are really going to be that maybe not all retailers are going to be that level of proactive and that level of being serious about the issue. We did see a few big box retailers, for instance, Dollar General was one that they actually saw a 14% increase in their inventory levels from Q1 to Q2, whereas other retailers have really been trying to dial back, seeing decreases or maybe just small increases. So it definitely does run the gamut. And when you look at medium-sized retailers and smaller ones, there are ones that are weirdly better positioned right now than I think these big box retailers, in part because the big box retailers, they were really able to aggressively bring in everything that they wanted on time. But then, that on time meant that as soon as those orders came in, that was just on time for consumer activity to massively change in the late winter, early spring of this year, with rising inflation and other sorts of macro elements really impacting the U.S. consumer. So, so it is really interesting to see how big box retailers are, at this time, they seem to be the ones that are struggling the most right now, whereas the small and medium-sized consumers, they're really still just trying to catch up in terms of inventory. So there, I guess you could say that there are some downsides, I guess, to having a lot of control over your supply chain, because then, you might get all your orders in just in time for a consumer downturn.
Love it, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Insightful as always. This article just went up yesterday. Amazing. I suggest everyone watching go check it out. And thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.